Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our monthly One Voice webinar sponsored by the National Tooling and Machining Association and Precision Metal Forming Association. Today is Friday, March the 27th, 2026. It is noon Eastern here, and today I am on my own with some of my colleagues traveling. This is again Omar Nashishibi, one of your lobbyists here with Inside Beltway in Washington, D.C. My colleagues normally with us are Caitlin Sickles and Paul Nathanson with the Policy Resolution Group at Bracewell that handle all the strategic communications and all the public relations for your two associations. Jumping into where we're going to be today and a number of issues, we will try to wrap up in a tight 30 minutes. We're going to be very tariff heavy with some updates on where we are on the IEEPA refunds and starting to get a preview for what's coming next on tariffs here in July when the Section 122 tariffs sunset on July the 24th. On the regulatory side, OSHA is starting to ramp up a few outreach initiatives as well, and we're getting a little bit more tax guidance. But to just start over here on Capitol Hill, we're at 2:19 a.m. on today, March the 27th. The United States Senate did, in fact, pass a partial funding of a Department of Homeland Security bill. What we are seeing here is legislation. Recall, there are 12 bills that must pass the Congress in order to fund the entire federal government. As of now, they had funded only 11. That leaves the Department of Homeland Security with all the concerns over ICE and CBP raised by Democrats holding that bill up, with Republicans demanding some additional funding requirements there. What ended up happening last night or this morning at 2:19, the Senate unanimously passed a bill that will fund the Department of Homeland Security through the fiscal year, which concludes through September 30th. It does provide funding for TSA agents. It does not provide funding for ICE agents, ICE operations, or for some other enforcement activities related to Customs and Border Protection. It did not include any of the major Democratic requests that they had asked for, nor did it make the same of the nor did the Democrat nor did Republicans rather get many of the items that they sought there. So what that leaves us with, assuming the House of Representatives, as of now it's 1203, I still haven't seen an update that they voted. More likely than not, they will pass this bill. It's a lot like usual. This is we ended up where we started in some of these talks at the beginning of the week. The president will sign it, and then hopefully we'll start seeing some TSA agents returning back to work and getting paid. The next step, though, because all sides didn't get what they wanted, and Democrats don't have much recourse here, a lot of them feel satisfied. They got rid of Kristi Noem and a few other areas, but what they're really now focused on is on reconciliation. And reconciliation is the process by which a Congress can pass a bill without getting through the Senate rules of 60 votes. You can get it through with a simple majority vote. Democrats did this for Obamacare, Republicans did this in the tax cuts of 2017, and Republicans did it again last year with the one big beautiful bill that we all worked on that containing the tax cuts. Why they want to use this reconciliation process is because they don't need Democrats. And that's the same reason that Democrats did it for healthcare. They didn't need Republicans. You can just go by a simple majority, but it's got a number of strings attached, particularly over on the Senate side, where you have to go through what's called a bird roll to make sure that there's a budgetary implications for all those provisions. And that's where some of the ICE and CBP funding may come in. They did include ICE funding in last year's reconciliation bill that the president signed on July the 4th. But looking at where they are now, some other things like the president's voting bill, that's unlikely to make it into reconciliation. They will likely seek to potentially attach additional Iran war funding on there. The request from the White House came over at $200 billion. That was double what was floating around town even just a week prior. So that's an area of concern and interest on Capitol Hill if that gets attached to a reconciliation bill for additional funding there for replenishing munitions. The challenge here, Republicans can only afford to lose 2 votes. And that's going to be very difficult within this environment if and when they get to reconciliation. And that's why a lot of us are still skeptical that they are going to get to it. Now that they've gotten through this must-pass bill, the Homeland Security one, they don't have to do another round of ICE funding. That can certainly wait until we get to the year end, given how much they were given last summer. And that brings us to the supplemental. Can the defense supplemental bill to fund the operations against Iran really continue in such a manner without some bipartisan input. And we know that one senator, Republican, is starting to do that process, reach across the aisle to put together some language. Whether it's 200 billion or 60 billion, we do know that there's some money there. So there's two things that the lawmakers are working on: reconciliation, Republican only. I'm among those that are skeptical they can get through, especially in this election year, but they certainly are starting to have those meetings at the committee and leadership level on the House side after Lindsey Graham started his process over in the Senate. Let's talk through a few regulatory items. This first one here is for your CPAs. As the other week, we did have an update on 163J. As a reminder, we had a number of tax provisions that we were working on during the One Big Beautiful Bill. There was bonus depreciation, that was the 100% there. We had 179, we doubled that. And then obviously the R&D tax credit, R&D expensing made permanent in 199A. There's another one about business interest loan deductions and being able to use that. This is section 163, and there's some potential opportunities for folks to look up in terms of some partnerships that could potentially amend their returns and go back to 2022 and 2024 and expense some of that 163J now. So there's some interactions here with the purchase of real estate and how this provision goes. So I would suggest now in tax time, if you've had any real estate transactions or anything that connected to the 163K, 68K that was used with some with loans, there's provision might be beneficial for you all there as well. Dusting off something that we talked about, might have been 2023 or so, 2024 in that range. Earlier than that even, the administrations have been really focused on Made in America. So I don't want this to be confused with Made in USA. There's two different things here. When you're dealing with Made in USA, this is the Federal Trade Commission and some of the labeling. And when you're dealing with this and American origin claims, there are certain requirements where if you are saying that it's made in America, everything has got to be made in America, and that's a very significant branding. What the government is doing through this executive order that was issued on March the 13th directs the Federal Trade Commission to prioritize enforcement actions against sellers and manufacturers who falsely claim their products are made in America or make similar American origin claims. This is not a new policy. This is existing law. I believe PMA held a webinar on this a number of years ago, and this is an area that is critical. If you are making a claim, or your competitor is, that it's made in USA, made in America, and you're using imported steel, that's not a made in USA product. So this executive order is now directing all agencies with country of origin labeling oversight to consult with the FTC to look at potentially new regulations to make it consistent with this guidance and to schedule periodic reviews to verify American origin claims for products that are sold to the federal government and removing some of those and having prosecutions under the False Claims Act. So bringing this back full circle, something that we've talked about in the past, this administration is certainly putting an emphasis on it. And then from the positive side, the Small Business Administration did recently hold an inaugural supplier matchmaking expo, and that's where they sought to bring together, just as it sounds, smaller businesses along with larger potential customers. DoD's been doing this for years, and Commerce has done it to some extent as well, and now you're starting to see it happen in this context here with the Small Business Administration that was really trying to take on a more active role here in Washington beyond simply putting out loans, although we will remind folks that, as what we talked about in our February, January webinar, that the Small Business Administration, this is the manufacturing loan program that's able to support individual manufacturers. So I would suggest taking a look at that if that's an area of interest, as it can be combined with conventional loans and already existing SBA loans that are out there. On OSHA, we previewed some things to come on OSHA last month. We're starting to see that now. This is a requirement unless you already have the previous poster. As always, someone should be checking the poster publications site for OSHA periodically. That's what we're doing here for you. OSHA Cares. This is talking about the employee rights that you've got. So the employee rights poster, you all have it up there. This is a new one that just came out this month, I believe, or a couple of weeks ago. So OSHA's job safety and health workplace posters required to display the poster in the workplace. You don't need to replace the previous versions, although if you're doing another round of your prints from your vendor, it can't always hurt to be up to date on there. This is the one we previewed last month quickly, and do want to touch on it. And I was at OSHA last week, and the team there was the leadership of OSHA really wanted to emphasize this new program called the Safety Champions Program. The intention is not to replace the voluntary protection program, but in a way to allow employers to be met where they are, is what they're saying. A way that's not as cumbersome or as comprehensive as a voluntary protection program, but another way for employers to be able to go through a process that is voluntary, cooperative program for employers to be able to build a safety program in there. There's three major steps that go into this program: introductory, intermediate, and advanced, that we'll talk about. It is based on OSHA's safety and recommendation programs. You can do this on your own, or you can request an SGE, that's a special government employee, and that can review your progress at any time. Keep in mind, as with the VPP, if you find something, you must fix it. And this is where they look at the 7 core elements that are coming in here, and some of their priorities. And so where they're going with this is, it's not, we got a question, is this intended to replace Sharp? Not entirely. This is really focused more on the smallest of, not small, on other companies. It's another pathway that they can do this and reach employees. They're trying to simplify things, was the main message that both the administrator and his deputy were trying to send to us, and try to get an incremental step. And so let me just jump to this. It'll help explain a little better. So these 3 steps, you go through your introductory steps, you develop your written safety policies, establish an EHS, create initial hazard inventory, and then you go through those, introducing everyone to those 7 core elements prior to this. Here's your intermediate step where you implement the introductory. You can start bringing workers into this and going through training and all. And so these, at any point in these steps, you can require, or you can request an OSHA assigned SGE to come help you provide feedback. So it's another way that OSHA is just trying to be more on the cooperative side. And this is something that we've talked about in the previous Trump administration, where they're trying to push a little bit away from some of the enforcement activity and get more back into a cooperative area there. So we'll see where that ends up. And just being crossed across one of my TVs here, it says the House ultra conservatives push back on the Senate TSA funding deal. What we are expecting is you're going to have Democrats are going to be providing some of those votes in order to supplement whatever losses that are going to come over from the Republicans on the House side. So despite what you might be seeing on headlines, we think that that should still probably happen at some point today. Jumping over to the heat rule, something that many of you have been following for some time with us in the past. Again, this came up in my, and it was come up in meetings over the number of weeks here. OSHA has received a letter here recently from several United States senators. 16 of them sent a letter to OSHA raising alarm about the emphasis program and what they're doing on their proposed heat rule. And the 16 of them, they urged the Department of Labor to withdraw the OSHA's proposed heat rule. They don't like the one size fits all that we've talked about in the past. And a refresher for those of you that aren't aware, the Biden administration went through a rulemaking process and proposed a rule for both indoor and outdoor identical workplaces that when the heat index reached or exceeded 80 Fahrenheit, they would impose certain requirement and restrictions, including offering a 15-minute work break, prescribing the water temperature that must be available at each workstation, potentially 60 degrees, and so on and going on from there. Ultimately, they've gone through all the rulemaking process. We're hearing OSHA may move forward on something with a little bit more flexibility, and that's where this is coming from Capitol Hill. Over to the other areas of the Department of Labor. This one relates to what we call the CEMEX bargaining decision. So if you have anything of a union organization in your shop related to the Brown-Forman decision versus NLRB, where employers violated labor law before a union vote, then this affects you. If it doesn't, let's move on. Joint employer, this is going to impact companies that either might be interrelated or the employees. It could work for a staffing agency and then also for you. There's a number of different responsibilities and liabilities under the FILSA that you might be required to adhere to. This is looking to roll back the Biden era rule towards where we were under the Trump one. This sign shows you that it's over at the White House for a final review, after which it gets published or sent back rather to the Department of Labor, and then it moves forward from there. On to the apprenticeships. This has been a very big focus for this administration and something that they sought to clarify after the Biden administration last year or year before tried to remove the ability for registered apprenticeship programs to include those that are competency-based only. They wanted time-based only. What this does here is ETA is the Employment and Training Administration. They are putting forward new guidance to the regulatory industry that is in the registered apprenticeships. This first circulator updates for guidelines that shows that you can do the tripart program, three approaches, competency, time, and hybrid. More importantly, this, for those of you that are involved in registered apprenticeship programs, the agency's committed to make apprenticeship registration determinations within 30 days. They're also going to set up an online public tracking tool so you can see where they are to help with transparency. So that's pretty significant for those that are involved in registered apprenticeships. And then lastly, in this section, before we jump into trade and tariffs, for those of you that do have partnerships with community colleges, there's training dollars that are out there, including for manufacturing. So if you already have a partnership with a community college that knows how to apply for federal dollars, they have until April 17th. Grants pretty significant, $6.5 million to $10 million that could go a long way in some of these communities that we've been into. So pass that along, please, to whoever your contact might be in a community college. On trade and tariffs, we're going to start with where we are on the refund policy and then quickly pivot into what's next with tariffs that you should expect this summer, and then on to what we're hearing on USMCA, and then we'll take a few questions and try to wrap up here in about the next 12 minutes or so. On the IEEPA refunds and where we are here, just want to put this in context. IEEPA is the International Emergency Economic Powers Act that the U.S. Supreme Court on February 20th ruled violated the law, and the president exceeded his authority because, as the Supreme Court Chief Justice said, only Congress has the power of the purse and to generate revenue. What this shows you here in the middle shows you that there were 330,000 importers of record. That means companies or individuals that they themselves paid a tariff to the federal government. They brought in 53 million products. Of those 330,000, brought in 53 million entries. Of those, that amounted to $166 billion worth of tariffs collected that the Supreme Court says now must be refunded. Two other things to note. The court said it must be refunded with interest. The government is accruing $650 million per month if they don't repay the tariffs and added interest owed to the importers of record. I'm going to say that phrase several more times today. What's also important is those importers of record, 330,000 of them who are going to start seeing their money back. Only 6.5% of them have started the necessary step they have to take, which is completing the e-refund form and putting up your ACH information. That already tells you it's going to be a process. Here's what they're doing so far and where we are. On March 4th, let's just jump to March 6th. On March 6th, Customs and Border Protection responded to the Court of International Trade. It's the CIT that is handling all of these trade and tariff refund cases. The CIT has directed CBP to come up with a process. Customs said that it needed 45 days in order to build a system. They lacked the manpower. They said if they had to do all of these refunds manually, it would take 4.3 million man hours to do it. So they're building a system. CBP says 45 days to deal with these 53 entries from 330,000 importers. The way they're going to process them, you're going to have each importer will be dealt with at a time. So it won't be each entry. You 330,000, they're not going to be submitting 53 million different entry requests. They are going to be submitting one per importer of record. And here's where I'll pause. An importer of record is the one that actually imports the product and pays the tariff directly to the federal government. So the vast majority of you attendees that I'm looking at here who are not importing directly from overseas, but you did pay a tariff to your supplier, you have a different process you have to start thinking about because you will not have standing to go through any of the steps that you'll see on the next slide in order to receive your money. You're going to have to go through a supplier or whomever else you paid, that middle person, to pay the tariff. This is where they are right now as of the 20th, the 19th. The next status update is going to be on March the 31st at 2 p.m. So Tuesday evening, we should get the documents in the Pacer system. Here's where we are, though, as of last Thursday afternoon and Friday morning. Customs said on this claim portal, that's where you're going to upload your entry CSV list. They're 73% completed. The mass processing, that's how they're going to save the 4.3 million man hours. That's 45% complete. Reliquidation, liquidations, 80%, and then the refund component where they get it over to Treasury. Our understanding is you will need to do as much due diligence as you can on the front end. They're going to automate the review, but it will go through an individual audit at some point. So make sure you've got everything done and uploaded, and you can go into your ACE system right now, your automated commercial exchange system, and being able to go look, and by in the left side there's a folder you can pull up your entry summaries and see it from there. Here are the steps. This now goes back to March the 12th, so CBP may update this on the 31st, but this is what Customs said would be the process. The importer of record is going to file an entry list in ACE, likely in the format of a CSV. They're going to get validated looking at just those IEPAs, entry number 9903.01, and then they'll go through that process of getting that there. Again, 40 to 80% complete. We'll see where they are on Tuesday. The target date, if you took them literally, would be around April the 20th. But again, some flexibility here. It doesn't mean you're going to get your money back on it at the end of April. It means there'll be a process by which you importers of record can submit something. And those of you who are not, I would strongly recommend you start compiling all of the IEPA tariffs that you have paid since February of last year and start thinking of a strategy in how to approach those suppliers and whether or not you had language in your T&C on that, and if your invoices had line items for the tariffs that you paid. Please keep in mind, these are not all tariffs. These are just the IEPA tariffs. These are not the 232s or general duty rates or the 301s. Let's talk about 232s. This is the nightmare that just will not go away, that Customs keeps making worse. There is no link here for a reason. This is not an official government document yet again. This will be the third time we show you this type of document. We had one that was stamped on December 3rd, the second one stamped January 15th, and now we have a March 15th update. This is for what we call a C. It's a Center for Excellence. And they've got different ones of them over at CBP. And this is where we are right now. On March the 15th, Customs and Border Protection somebody that had conversations with CBP that got memorialized, put out the latest way to how to deal with derivatives, products that are made out of steel and aluminum or iron or copper, and how do you value them. So this part is not necessarily new, but here's what they are starting to tell us. This is now different from before. Previous guidance that came out said that you cannot separate out the assembly, or you can't separate any of the components. So, for example, the non-steel aluminum cost does not refer to costs of production, manufacturing, machining, fabrication, labor, overhead, profit, packaging, all of these things that we were out there looking at that were excluded. But now when they're saying if there's items that could be used for both, so let's go back to their window assembly. They use a window that is, it's $100, $80 is aluminum, $20 is glass. What they initially said, as recently as 2 months ago, is that the $80, whether or not assembly is involved, coating, treating, all of that is subject to the 50% tariff under the Section 232 action. Well, now that they're saying is slightly different. For costs that are attributable both the non-steel content and the steel content, and aluminum and copper, our purposes, then like labor, overhead, profit, packaging, an acceptable method is now to apportion the cost to both lines based on the value ratio. Again, we are not giving legal or customs advice, but if you take that literally, that might be interpreted to mean that, okay, my assembly and my other prices that are in there, that maybe could be at an 80-20 split. That's something you need to be speaking with your customs broker and who's giving you advice from a legal standpoint. That's pretty interesting in terms of, some might read as yet another change in how they're looking at those guidance and valuations that you're receiving. This one might be less applicable, but shows you some of the things that they just don't think about. This is one they're applying, and this comes out from the steel. excuse me, the aluminum groups have really focused on this one quite a bit. They're saying, so you want me to pay a tariff on the beer that's inside of the aluminum can that's coming in? So this is odd that they use this language, which is why it tells you it's not an official government document. If an obviously non-steel or aluminum article like perfume or lotion is on a 232 derivatives tariff list, then it's the container that is the target of the 232, and it's the importer's cost of the container if it's made of steel or aluminum that is subject to the Section 232 already go in there. So that's something to take a look at from else that's also been added. A few other areas here, and we'll get ready to round this section out and get ready to answer a few more questions that have just popped in there. On the 232, if you're doing articles of iron, this is trying to clarify if it's on Chapter 72, it's in there. There is no change on that. But this is a more of a clarification of things that we largely already knew, may not really truly apply to many people here, so I won't spend much time on that. But it does come down to what are you using? Is it iron? Is it steel? And then where does it ultimately fall into with the derivative classifications and the final reporting guidelines and the timelines that they've given you? So they're admitting that they've got some changes that they've gone through in some of the valuation processes, and then they ultimately give you an idea of where they are with some of the chapter clarifications. So again, if you're bringing anything in here and you're looking at dealing with the valuations now and you're concerned and you want to go with small c conservative valuations, you've got to look at these three guidances. And again, we don't have a link to give you. They're found on law firm websites, and Customs is standing by them. They're verbally briefing customs brokers and attorneys, and they're getting memorialized in such a way. That's what they're dealing with on the 232 derivatives. Where does that leave us now on what is coming next on the tariffs after the 122s go away? So a refresher, Section 122 tariffs are now in place to replace those IEEPAs, and they are currently at 10%. Navarro this week said that they were going to go back up to 15. We still have not seen that language come out yet. So what the government's doing, they have initiated a Section 301 tariff investigation, same as they've got tariffs on 10,000 imports from China right now. They're looking to impose tariffs for excess manufacturing capacity. They are targeting 15 countries plus the entire European Union. This one does include Mexico, but does not include Canada. It covers sectors ranging from steel, aluminum, autos, batteries. Machine tools are also specifically mentioned in here, as is machinery and robotics. Public comments are due on April 15th. They're going to hold a couple of days of hearings on this based on what we are told. What they are targeting are countries that are producing more goods than they can consume, or they are productively investing domestically. They see that the expansion of exports to the United States or to third-party countries is then displacing existing manufacturing here in the United States. That is the excess global capacity that is targeting, again, these 15 countries plus the 27 out of the EU. Give you an example of what they're looking at. Here's the language they used on Germany that has a trade goods surplus that has reached 5.6% of GDP overall, and that the United States, and with $102 billion here with the US. So Germany maintains a large persistent goods trade surplus, automobiles, auto parts, machinery, and electronic equipment, among others. And that's an area of concern. They did this also for Switzerland, Norway, Taiwan, Japan, South Korea, Malaysia, Vietnam, and a handful of the other countries as well, where they identify the specific areas of concern. And the obvious here is that this could result, and likely will result, in tariffs. We were with the very senior member of a House yesterday on the Republican side, who's close to the White House, and said, yes, you better believe that when these 122 tariffs go away at 12:01 a.m. on July the 24th, the president already has these other 301 tariffs lined up and ready to go, and they do. That one on the excess capacity. Now you've got this one on forced labor. That's going to cover 76 countries. It's 59 countries plus the 27 block under the EU. So excuse me, 86 countries that are covered under here. This one does include Canada, and that's an important thing to factor in. And this looks at forced labor, but not necessarily forced labor in Canada like you have it in China, but that you're not doing enough to restrict forced labor in your supply chain. Public comments are also due on April 15th and could also lead to tariffs. So again, the message here is at the end, when you're done with tariffs on the 122s that are going to expire on July the 24th, they're immediately pivoting into these others. For you automotive folks, we do have a portal opening up on Wednesday, April the 1st, that will run for 14 days for companies to request adding auto parts to the tariff list. This is going goes on quarterly, and so this is the next opportunity here is coming up, and that's again parts that are going in for the automotive industries. There's an inclusion portal that opens up where companies can request to add a 25% tariff to automotive parts that are coming in. We do want to flag one of the areas here on a public comment period on U.S. Trade Representative. I just got interviewed by the U.S. International Trade Commission on this a couple hours ago this morning on whether or not revoking permanent normal trade relation status for China, how that fits in. What that would mean is China would then be treated for import purposes the same as Russia, Belarus, Cuba, and North Korea, and in some cases jump up to a 40% tariff rate. This is an investigation with a report due. Nothing actionable for our members here, but just to be aware of some of the conversations that are going on around town. This officially lets you know that the United States and Mexico are in discussions. They started what was called on the 16th a scoping meeting, and that, or on 18th, that scoping meeting set out the parameters of issues on which they want to have conversations. Mexico has been pretty adamant they don't want any changes that would trigger another vote by the U.S. Congress for obvious reasons, but we are looking at potential significant changes that the United States is requesting. But the fact that they've had their high-level scoping meetings to lay out what they're going to do, they've got timelines on critical minerals and intellectual property. That's a positive sign. That's moving forward there as well. Canada can't say the same, but we do see some progress on the Mexico side. And that aligns a little bit with what we're seeing on the administration getting more involved on trade policy. They did put out their trade report to Congress the other day. Let's go international, then we'll get ready to wrap up here. On the European Union, they are proposing their own Buy EU plan. We talked about the Made in America previously. Here's this one related to their proposed Buy EU plan to align industrial competitiveness with decarbonization goals. I would strongly caution anyone that's dealing with shipping into Europe to start thinking about what do those relationships look like in several years from now. For example, Germany's beginning to do an audit of its own supply chain to see where its exposure is, not to China, but to the United States. And they're encouraging others to do the same. That should tell you and give you forewarning if you've got export exposure there and how some ties might continue to fray over the next couple of years. So this gives you an idea of where the Europeans are going, especially as they look at other markets. Mercosur, this is one of the largest trade blocs now in the world. It covers Argentina, Brazil, and Uruguay, and Paraguay already as well. Coming into the agreement, also ratifying it. So this is a very, very significant area between the United States, or excuse me, European Union rather, and covering some 700 million, some odd people, something like that in that range. So very significant. Lastly, on Europe, the Parliament did pass just recently yesterday the deal they struck with the United States, referred to as the Turnberry Agreement. That agreement is going to be an area where they try to figure out what ends up happening with the tariffs on steel and aluminum. They came to an agreement where they had a 15% top line agreement from all imports coming into the United States. And they ended up saying, okay, we'll leave it at 15% for imports coming in from Europe. And the Europeans would in turn then say, we will drop tariffs on industrial goods. Well, that takes European Parliament to ratify it, and then the individual states must do so as well. That has yet to happen, so that is in progress and needs to continue there for all the states now. All right, some data points. China exports are up. We've seen that all our numbers. Chinese exports are up. Their trade surplus is up. It's almost across the board, across a number of categories there. Manufacturing jobs are down in some ways. We're seeing oil prices go up. There's a lot of uncertainty going on, especially with some of the different comments coming between the White House and Tehran. And so we'll see how this continues to go. As always, please stay connected with us through our One Voice podcast. We did have a great podcast focused on the Supreme Court case brought by the plaintiff in that, learning resources in the Supreme Court. So strongly encourage you to take a look at that wherever you get your podcast downloads. And with that, happy to answer the questions that we've received. Feel free to type in any more that you have in here. As always, this is being recorded and a copy of the slide deck will be sent out to everyone afterwards. First question came in. Do we have a list of what falls into the IEEPA tariffs category? The simplest way to think of it is it excluded outside of China. The IEEPA tariffs excluded steel and aluminum, those 232 items. It excluded USMCA compliant goods. There was another list of roughly 1,100 or so imports. It excluded, think of critical minerals, electronics, semiconductors, cell phones, nickel. It excluded those. But everything else was covered. The entire goal of the IEPAs was reciprocal global tariffs. It covered virtually all those products that came in that did not already have a tariff on them, with the exception of those that I mentioned on that Annex 1 and 2 that were given an exemption. So the tariff, if you're seeking a refund, for example, inverse that question, if you're seeking a refund, you'd be eligible, if you're importer of a record, for a refund for virtually everything unless it's on the 232 steel, aluminum, autos, parts, aircraft, or medium heavy duty truck. If you bought machine or tooling that is not on the 232 list, for example, that would have been subject to IEPA. Yes, that one could have gone in there as well. So definitely check if you're an importer of record. It's coded. It'll say 990301 in your ACE system, so it'll easily classify. You'll be able to know what you paid those tariffs on there as well. How could some companies already have submitted their e-refund form if the system isn't in place yet? They haven't. That's not a thing. You can't submit it. There is no place to submit it. Whoever's told you they've submitted it is confused. What you have done or should have done by now is you should have gone in by February the 6th and submitted your e-refund information. The started last day was February 5th that they were going to issue any paper refunds starting on February the 6th, and we would have had this in our January webinar. I would urge you to see that on metalworkingadvocate.org. There you will see they've got an e-refund portal. You've got to go in there. There's a tab up top, and you'll include your ACH information. So it'll process refunds for other tariffs that are out there and other duties. For example, if you've got a post-summary correction that you filed, but on the IEPA tariffs, the system is not accepting those. It's not open yet. People have tried to put it in, and it won't let you get to the steps that you need to. And if you are using it, you shouldn't. They're creating a CAPE, the CAPE. That's the process that needs to be used there as well. Don't see any other trade questions unless some come in. Is a workforce one? Is the administration planning on adding back any of the funding to the MEPs who focus on the industrial sector and workforce development? My friend, when I see you in a few weeks, we'll talk a little bit more about that. But this administration, if and when we get the president's budget request, which is now weeks and weeks old, I suspect it'll zero out MEPs. George W. Bush zeroed them out. Trump also has zeroed them out multiple times. And sometimes it's because Congress is going to put the money back in. And we did see Congress do there. We have a saying in town: what the president proposes, Congress disposes. And I think in the MEP, that's probably going to be the same. Based on my meetings this week, I was on the Hill a lot. This week was House, last week a lot of Senate. We're going to expect a very robust lame duck session, most likely after the election's over, on taxes, on potentially workforce, on trade, and a number of areas that are out there. With that, I got one question that came in. Who do I have in the Final Four? I'm a baseball guy. My kid's high school game just got canceled, so I'm not the right one to answer on that. But I know Houston seems to be doing well, a few others, but we'll keep watching. And as always, please feel free to tune in next month. If you have any questions we did not answer, please pass them along, and we'll try to get more clarity. And in the interim, please feel free to reach out to PMA or NTMA for any of the further questions we can answer. Thank you. Have a good weekend. We'll talk to you next month.